They say on Hawthorne Plantation, pain was the master's favorite game. Silas Hawthorne treated his own slaves like rag dolls, dragging them into the dirt, beating them bloody, laughing as the crowd was forced to watch. Most broke, most surrendered. That was the point. But then, one morning, Silas picked Daniel, the quiet carpenter no one paid attention to. A thin man, a tired man, a man who never talked back. Silas swung first, certain this would be easy, but Daniel moved. He slipped past every blow like he'd been waiting his whole life for that moment. The master didn't land a single hit, and when Silas finally fell into the dust, the plantation went silent, because they all knew their world had just changed. What Silas never understood was this. He hadn't chosen a weak man that day. He had chosen the one man trained to survive anything, even him. And once Daniel rose to his feet, the question hanging in the air was simple. If the master turned cruelty into a sport, what happens when the wrong man decides to play back? Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The sun barely cleared the tree line when Brackett called them all in. Daniel heard the bell first. 3 sharp rings. Never a good sound. He set down his saw, brushed wood dust from his hands, and walked toward the gathering field with the others. Nobody spoke. Nobody rushed. They had learned long ago that hurrying meant you cared, and caring meant you could be broken more easily. The field stretched wide and empty, except for the oak tree at its center. Spanish moss hung from the branches like old curtains. The grass underneath had been trampled flat from years of gatherings just like this one. Daniel took his place near the back, standing beside Isaac, whose gray hair caught the early light. The older man's face showed nothing. It never did anymore. Tobias shuffled up on Daniel's other side, younger, and still holding on to scraps of anger that showed in his tight jaw. Daniel did not look at him. Looking meant connection. Connection meant pain when they took someone away. More workers arrived, men from the fields, women from the main house, children too small to understand, but old enough to witness. Everyone had to watch. That was the rule. Silas wanted an audience for his theater. Brackett stood near the oak tree, holding a leather-bound ledger against his chest, like scripture. His face remained blank, as always. He did not enjoy this work, but he performed it with the same cold efficiency he brought to everything else. The overseer checked his pocket watch twice, then nodded toward the main house. Silas Hawthorne emerged from the wide front doors like royalty greeting subject. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with the easy confidence of a man who had never been denied anything in his entire life. His white shirt was crisp despite the humid morning. His boots shone. He carried himself like a soldier preparing for parade, chest out, chin high. When he smiled, it did not reach his eyes. "Good morning," Silas called out, his voice booming across the silent field. Nobody responded. He did not seem to mind. Beautiful day. Perfect day, really. The kind of day that makes a man grateful for what he has. He walked slowly toward the oak tree, letting his boots thud against the packed earth. Each step deliberate, theatrical. You all know what day it is. Silas stopped beneath the hanging moss and clasped his hands behind his back. Contest day, my favorite tradition. Keeps everyone sharp. Reminds us all of the natural order of things. Daniel kept his eyes on the middle distance. Not on Silas directly. Not on the ground either. Somewhere safe in between. Now, I've been thinking, Silas continued, pacing back and forth like a preacher building toward revelation. These contests have gotten predictable. Too easy. Where's the excitement? Where's the challenge? He paused, scanning the gathered crowd with theatrical thoughtfulness. So today, we're changing things up. Silas grinned. Today, I'm not choosing the weakest among you. Today, I want someone with a little fight in them, someone who might actually make this interesting." The silence deepened. Daniel felt Tobias go rigid beside him. Silas pointed toward a young man named Marcus, barely 20 years old, with arms thick from hauling cotton bales. "You! Step forward." Marcus hesitated, then walked toward the tree. His hands trembled slightly. "That's right." "Come on." Silas rolled his shoulders, loosening his muscles. "Let's see what you've got." What happened next took less than 2 minutes. Silas moved with practiced brutality. He feinted left, struck right, drove his fist into Marcus's stomach hard enough to double him over. When Marcus tried to protect himself, Silas grabbed his arm and twisted it backward until something popped. Marcus screamed once before biting down on his own tongue to stop the sound. Silas did not stop. He kicked Marcus's legs out from under him, then stood over the young man's writhing body like a hunter over fallen prey. "See?" Silas addressed the crowd, not even breathing hard. "That's the problem right there. No technique, no strategy, just panic and flailing." He nudged Marcus with his boot. "You people never learn." Brackett gestured to 2 field hands, who dragged Marcus away toward the punishment shed. The young man left a small trail of blood in the dirt. Silas wiped his hands on a cloth Brackett offered him. "Next week, we'll try again. Maybe one of you will surprise me." He turned to leave, then stopped. "Oh, and Marcus won't be working for a few days. The rest of you will need to cover his share of the quota. Failure to meet daily requirements will result in additional discipline." He walked back toward the main house, whistling something that might have been a church hymn. The crowd dispersed slowly. Nobody helped each other. Nobody spoke. They simply returned to their assigned tasks, like water flowing back into familiar channels after a stone is thrown. Daniel returned to the workshop. He picked up his saw. He resumed cutting boards for the new stable Silas wanted built by month's end. His hands moved with practiced precision, measuring twice, cutting once, never wasting material. Good work meant less attention. Less attention meant survival. The day wore on. The sun climbed higher, then began its slow descent. Daniel worked through the heat, stopping only when Brackett brought the midday water ration. He drank his share in 3 careful swallows, then returned to his labor. By late afternoon, the light turned golden. Daniel finished his last cut, cleaned his tools, and walked back to his cabin. A small structure barely large enough for a single person, with gaps in the walls that let in winter cold and summer bugs. He sat on the floor. Someone had left a tin plate with cornmeal mush and a small piece of salted pork. He ate slowly, chewing each bite thoroughly to make it last longer. Through the thin walls, he heard voices, laughter. Silas was outside somewhere, talking with visiting neighbors. "Getting bored with the easy ones," Silas's voice carried clearly across the evening air. "Need a real challenge soon. Someone who will actually make me work for it." His companions laughed, made jokes Daniel could not quite hear. Daniel finished his meal. He set the plate aside. He lay down on the hard floor and closed his eyes, knowing sleep would not come easily. It never did on contest days. Outside, Silas kept talking, his voice full of hunger for something he could not name. The pounding came before dawn. Daniel woke to the sound of fists hammering wood. Not his door yet, but close. 2 cabins down. 3. The rhythm was violent and deliberate. Each strike meant to jar people from whatever fragile rest they had managed to find. "Get up!" Brackett's voice cut through the darkness. "Everyone up! Behind the barn! Now!" Daniel sat up slowly, his back protesting against the hard floor. He had maybe slept 2 hours. The sky outside showed no light yet, just the deep purple-black that came before true morning. More pounding. Closer now. "Move!" Brackett shouted. "Master's orders!" Daniel stood and pulled on his shoes, worn leather things with holes near the toes. He smoothed his shirt, tucked it in properly. Looking presentable mattered. Small acts of dignity sometimes bought you minutes of being overlooked. Brackett's fist slammed against Daniel's door. "You too, carpenter!" "Behind the barn." Daniel opened the door. The overseer stood there with a lantern, his face shadowed and hard. "You heard me. Move." "Yes, sir," Daniel said quietly. He stepped outside into the cool pre-dawn air. Others were already walking toward the barn, slow-moving shadows in the darkness. Nobody spoke. The only sounds were footsteps on dirt and Brackett's continuing shouts as he worked his way down the remaining cabins. The barn loomed large against the dark sky. Someone had lit torches along the back wall, casting flickering orange light across the open space behind the structure. Daniel joined the growing line of enslaved workers, taking a spot between an older woman named Ruth and a young field hand whose name he did not know. More people arrived. Isaac shuffled into place. Tobias appeared, his jaw tight again. Children came with their mothers, eyes wide and frightened. Everyone assembled in a ragged line facing the barn wall. Silas emerged from the shadows near the far torch. He looked fresh, clean, energized. His shirt was different from yesterday, pale blue this time, and his hair was neatly combed. He carried himself like a man about to attend a social gathering, not someone who had dragged 30 people from their beds in the middle of the night. "I know it's early," Silas called out cheerfully, "but I couldn't sleep. Got to thinking about what I said yesterday, about wanting more excitement, more challenge." He walked slowly along the line, examining faces, and I realized, why wait for next week? Why not shake things up right now? He stopped in front of Marcus, who stood hunched and cradling his injured arm. Silas studied him briefly, then moved on. "Here's the new rule," Silas announced. "From now on, I choose my opponents randomly. No more picking the obvious ones. No more predictable contests." He smiled wide. "This way, everyone gets a fair chance to participate. Democratic, really, when you think about it." He continued his slow walk along the line. Daniel kept his breathing steady. He focused on the torch flame ahead of him, watching it dance and flicker. He did not look at Silas. He did not look at anyone. "See, the problem with always choosing the weak ones," Silas said, now directly in front of Ruth, "is that there's no sport in it, no real test." He moved on. "I want to see what you people are really made of." He stopped. Daniel felt the presence before he saw it. Silas was standing directly in front of him now, close enough that Daniel could smell tobacco and coffee on his breath. "You," Silas said. Daniel raised his eyes slowly, meeting Silas's gaze with careful blankness. "What's your name again?" Silas asked. "Daniel, sir." "Daniel. Right. The carpenter." Silas circled him once, looking him up and down like examining a horse at market. "You're older than most. What are you? 35? 40? 37, sir." 37. Silas nodded thoughtfully. "And you've been here how long?" 8 years, sir." 8 years of quiet, steady work. Never caused trouble. Never complained. Silas stopped circling and faced him again. "You know what? I think you're perfect." Daniel said nothing. "Step forward," Silas commanded. Daniel moved out of the line. Behind him, he heard Ruth's sharp intake of breath, quickly stifled. Brackett cleared a space in the dirt, pushing back the onlookers to form a rough circle. The torchlight created dancing shadows across the makeshift arena. Silas rolled his shoulders, loosening up. "Same rules as always," Silas announced to the crowd. "Fight until someone can't continue. No weapons. No help from the audience." He looked at Daniel. "Defend yourself however you want. I encourage it, actually. Makes things more interesting." Daniel stood very still, hands at his sides. Silas grinned. "Not going to raise your guard? No fighting stance?" "I don't want to fight, sir," Daniel said quietly. "Nobody asked what you wanted." Silas raised his fists. "Begin." Silas moved first, throwing a straight punch toward Daniel's face. Daniel shifted his weight slightly. His head tilted 3 inches to the left. Silas's fist passed through empty air. Silas blinked, surprised, then threw another punch. Daniel stepped back, his feet sliding smoothly across the dirt. The second punch missed by a wider margin. "Stand still," Silas growled. He lunged forward with a combination: left jab, right cross, left hook. Daniel swayed backward from the first, ducked under the second, and turned his shoulders to let the third slide past his cheek. His movements were minimal, economical. He never lifted his hands. He simply wasn't where the punches landed. The crowd remained silent, watching. Silas's breathing grew heavier. His face flushed. "Fight back!" Daniel did not fight back. He kept moving in small, precise ways. Weight transfers, angle changes, subtle pivots that kept him just out of reach. He looked almost bored, like a man avoiding raindrops rather than fists. Silas threw a wild haymaker. Daniel bent at the waist. The punch sailed overhead. "Damn you!" Silas shouted. He charged forward, abandoning technique entirely. Daniel sidestepped. Silas stumbled, caught himself, spun around. His chest heaved. Sweat darkened his shirt collar. Daniel stood calm, hands still at his sides, breathing normally. Silas roared and lunged with everything he had, throwing his full body weight into a tackle meant to drive Daniel into the ground. Daniel waited until the last possible moment, then stepped to the right and slightly backward. Silas crashed face first into the dirt. The impact made a solid thud. Dust rose in a small cloud. Silas lay there for 3 full seconds before pushing himself up onto his hands and knees, coughing. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Silas looked up at Daniel, his face covered in dirt, his eyes wide with something that might have been shock or rage or fear. Blood trickled from his nose. Daniel had not touched him once. "You—" Silas choked on dust and spat. "You—" Brackett stepped forward uncertainly. "Sir?" Silas climbed to his feet, wavering slightly. He wiped his face with his sleeve, smearing the dirt and blood together. His hands trembled. For the first time in his life, Master Silas Hawthorne looked small in front of his property. The silence stretched impossibly long. Then Silas pointed at Daniel with a shaking finger. "Lock him up! The punishment shed. Now!" Brackett gestured to 2 field hands who grabbed Daniel's arms. Daniel did not resist. They pulled him away from the circle, toward the small wooden structure everyone called the shed, a windowless box where people went to be broken. "Nobody feeds him," Silas shouted after them. "Nobody goes near him. He's mine to deal with." They pushed Daniel inside and slammed the door. The lock clicked. Darkness swallowed everything except thin lines of torchlight bleeding through the cracks in the walls. Daniel sat down on the dirt floor and waited as the sun began its slow climb toward morning. The shed smelled of old wood, sweat, and fear. Daniel sat with his back against the wall, knees drawn up, conserving energy. Through the cracks between the boards, he watched daylight fade into evening. His stomach ached with hunger, but hunger was familiar. He had learned to live with it many times before. Footsteps approached the shed. Daniel did not move. The lock rattled, metal scraping against metal. The door opened. Silas stood silhouetted against the darkening sky, a lantern in his hand. "Get up," Silas said. Daniel rose slowly, careful not to appear threatening. Silas stepped inside and closed the door behind him. He hung the lantern on a nail jutting from the wall, casting yellow light across the small space. His face was clean now, the dirt and blood washed away, but his eyes looked strange, wide and restless. "How did you do it?" Silas demanded. "Sir? Don't play stupid with me." Silas moved closer. "Those movements, that footwork. Where did you learn it?" Daniel kept his expression neutral. "I don't understand what you mean, sir." "You made me look like a fool." Silas's voice cracked slightly. "In front of everyone. You didn't even try to fight, and I still couldn't touch you." Daniel said nothing. Silas paced the small shed. 3 steps, one direction, 3 steps back. "I've fought dozens of you people. Dozens. Some put up resistance. Some try to hit back. But none of them ever moved like you did. Like they knew exactly where I was going before I did it. I was just trying not to get hurt, sir." Liar. Silas stopped pacing and faced him directly. "That wasn't panic. That wasn't luck. That was training." Daniel met his gaze steadily, but offered no response. Silas waited. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the creak of the shed's old boards settling. Finally, Silas turned and left without another word. The lock clicked back into place. Daniel sat down again, settling against the wall. He had expected violence. This was stranger. Hours passed. The moon rose. Daniel dozed fitfully, head against the rough wood. The lock rattled again. Silas returned with a tin cup of water and a piece of bread wrapped in cloth. He set them on the floor near Daniel's feet without speaking, then left immediately. The door locked again. Daniel stared at the offering for a long moment before reaching for the water. He drank slowly, making it last, then ate half the bread. The rest he saved, wrapping it back in the cloth and tucking it into his shirt. Morning came. Sunlight crept through the cracks. Daniel heard the plantation waking. Distant voices, work bells, the sounds of daily routine beginning again. Nobody came near the shed. Mid-morning, Silas appeared. This time he brought a thin blanket. "It gets cold at night," Silas said, tossing the blanket to Daniel, "especially this close to fall." "Thank you, sir," Daniel said carefully. Silas sat down on a crate that had been left in the corner. He looked tired, like he had not slept much. "I've been thinking about what I saw, trying to figure it out." Daniel waited. "You're not young anymore," Silas continued. "You're past your prime fighting years, but yesterday you moved like someone half your age, like someone who's done it 1,000 times before." He leaned forward. "So I'll ask again. Where did you learn it?" "I've never been taught to fight, sir." "I didn't say fight. I said move." Silas's eyes narrowed. "There's a difference, isn't there?" Daniel considered his words carefully. "All I know is carpentry, sir. And staying out of trouble." Silas stood abruptly and left without the food Daniel had expected might follow the blanket. The day dragged on. Daniel's hunger deepened. He finished the saved bread, but remained thirsty. Through the wall cracks, he watched shadows lengthen as afternoon arrived. Silas returned near evening. He brought water again, and this time a small bowl of cold beans. "Eat," Silas commanded. Daniel ate while Silas watched him. "I'll make you an offer," Silas said. "Teach me how to move like you do, and I'll bring you more. Food, water, whatever you need to stay healthy." Daniel swallowed the beans slowly. "I don't know what I can teach, sir." "Then you'll stay hungry." Silas started toward the door, then paused. "Think about it. I'll be back." The second day began with Silas arriving before dawn. "Show me," he said without preamble. "Just the footwork. How you stepped away from my punches." Daniel stood slowly, his body stiff from sleeping on dirt. "It's just stepping, sir. Show me." Daniel demonstrated a simple weight shift, moving from standing square to turning his lead foot slightly outward. When someone comes at you, you don't move your whole body at once. You move your weight first, then your feet follow. Silas tried to copy the movement. His feet tangled. He stumbled slightly. "No, sir," Daniel said quietly. "Wait first. Feel which leg is carrying you. Then let the other one become light." They worked for an hour. Silas grew frustrated with how difficult the simple movement proved. When he finally left, he brought back breakfast. Real breakfast, with eggs and a piece of salt pork. "Keep going tomorrow," Silas said. Afternoon brought another visit. Silas wanted to practice again. His obsession was growing clearer. This was not about improving his fighting. This was about understanding how he had been beaten without being struck. That evening, Silas arrived with bread, cheese, and more water. "The weekly fights are suspended," he announced, "until further notice." Daniel absorbed this information silently. "People are asking why," Silas continued. "I told them I'm considering new formats, more challenging competitions." He sat on the crate again. "Truth is, I need to understand what happened. Need to make sure it never happens again." Daniel said nothing. "You're different from the others," Silas muttered, almost to himself. "There's something about you." The third day followed the same pattern. Morning visit for training, afternoon visit for more practice, evening visit with food, and increasingly strange conversation. Silas brought a bottle of whiskey that night. He drank from it while Daniel sat against the wall. "You're not like the others," Silas said, his words slightly slurred. "Most of them are just animals, beasts of burden. But you—" he gestured vaguely with the bottle. "You're something else." Daniel kept his face carefully blank. "I've been reading," Silas continued, "about different fighting styles, different cultures, trying to figure out where you learned what you know." He took another drink. "Haven't found an answer yet." The whiskey made Silas talkative. He rambled about his father, about expectations, about the pressure of running a plantation. Daniel listened without responding, letting the words wash over him. Finally, Silas stood unsteadily. He walked to the door, opened it, then paused. "I'm leaving it unlocked tonight," Silas said. "Interesting experiment. Let's see if you're smart enough to stay put." He walked away, taking the lantern. Darkness filled the shed except for moonlight through the cracks. Daniel sat very still. The unlocked door waited. Freedom lay perhaps 50 feet away, through the darkness, across fields he knew well. He did not move. Running alone meant leaving everyone else to face Silas's rage. It meant condemning Isaac, Tobias, Ruth, and all the others to punishment for his escape. It meant destroying whatever fragile progress had been made, the stopped fights, the temporary peace, the strange dependency Silas was developing. Daniel pulled the blanket around his shoulders and closed his eyes. The shed door remained unlocked all night. Early morning light crept through the windows of Silas Hawthorne's study. He stumbled through the door, still wearing yesterday's clothes, the whiskey bottle clutched loosely in one hand. His head throbbed. His eyes felt swollen and dry. He collapsed into the leather chair behind his desk and dropped the bottle on the floor. It rolled away, empty. The room spun slightly when he closed his eyes, so he kept them open, staring at the ceiling until the rotation slowed. What was he doing? Why had he left the shed unlocked? The questions circled through his mind like vultures. Daniel had not run. That fact settled into Silas's chest like a stone. Any other man would have fled. Any sensible person would have taken the opportunity and disappeared into the night. But Daniel had stayed. Silas rubbed his face with both hands. His beard felt greasy. He needed a bath, needed sleep, needed to stop thinking about the quiet carpenter who had made him look weak in front of everyone. But he could not stop thinking. He pulled himself upright and opened the top drawer of his desk. Inside lay stacks of papers, purchase receipts, work assignments, inventory lists, everything documented, everything recorded. His father had taught him that much. Keep records. Know what you own. Silas shuffled through the papers until he found the section marked with Daniel's name. There was not much. Daniel had been on the plantation for 8 years, purchased from an estate sale after the previous owner died. Before that, Silas frowned. He pulled out the thin file and spread the papers across his desk. The original bill of sale showed Daniel had been 27 when purchased, healthy, strong back, skilled in carpentry, no family listed, no marks of rebellion, a standard transaction, nothing unusual. But folded inside the bill of sale, pressed flat against another document, was something else. A second piece of paper, yellowed and water-stained. Silas had never noticed it before. He unfolded it carefully. The paper crackled. It was a shipping manifest. Old. The date read 1850, 15 years ago. Silas scanned the list of names, descriptions, and origins. His eyes stopped halfway down the page. Male, approximately 20 years. Captured during coastal raid. Origin, Gullah settlement, South Carolina lowlands. No English. Resisted transport. Value, reduced due to difficulty. Next to the description, someone had written a note in faded ink. Skilled in traditional hunting techniques. Evasive movement patterns observed. Potentially dangerous, if not properly controlled. Silas read the words again. Then a third time. Gullah settlement. Coastal raid. He sat back in his chair, the paper trembling in his hands. Daniel had not been born into slavery. He had been free, taken from a community that lived by water and marsh, a people known for their independence, their distinct culture, their resistance to outside control. Silas had heard stories about those settlements, isolated, self-sufficient, practicing traditions passed down from their African ancestors, traditional hunting techniques, evasive movement patterns, the footwork, the dodging, the way Daniel moved like he could see attacks before they came. That was not luck. That was not natural talent stumbled upon accidentally. That was training, deliberate, systematic, taught to boys as they grew, preparing them for survival in terrain where danger came from animals, weather, and men who sought to capture them. Silas felt his stomach drop. He had chosen the one man on the entire plantation who actually knew how to fight. Not in the crude, desperate way of men backed into corners, in the calculated, practiced way of someone who had been taught since childhood how to read movement, control distance, and turn an opponent's strength against them. Fear crawled up Silas's spine. He had been showing off, proving his dominance, and he had selected the single person capable of destroying him. But Daniel had not destroyed him, had not even tried. That realization brought a different feeling, something stranger than fear. Fascination. Wonder. Why had Daniel held back? What was he waiting for? Silas stood abruptly. The room tilted. He steadied himself against the desk and took several deep breaths. The whiskey fog was lifting, replaced by sharp clarity and growing paranoia. He needed to confront this, needed to understand what Daniel wanted, needed to know if he was living alongside a threat or an opportunity. Afternoon sun baked the plantation when Silas marched toward the punishment shed. He had bathed, changed clothes, tried to make himself presentable, but his hands still shook slightly as he unlocked the door and stepped inside. Daniel sat in the same position as always, back against the wall, expression calm. He looked up when Silas entered, but did not stand. "I found your record," Silas said, without preamble. "The real one." Daniel's face did not change. "You were taken from a Gullah settlement," Silas continued. 15 years ago. You were free. You were trained." He pulled the folded manifest from his pocket and held it up. "Traditional hunting technique. Evasive movement patterns. That's what it says right here." Daniel remained silent. "So when I picked you to fight," Silas said, his voice rising, "you already knew exactly what to do. You were not lucky. You were not improvising. You were using skills you learned as a boy. Still nothing." "Say something," Silas shouted. Daniel looked at him steadily. "What would you like me to say, sir?" "The truth. The truth is written on that paper you are holding," Daniel said quietly. "I cannot add anything to it." Silas felt his anger collapse into something more complicated. Fear and fascination twisted together. "You could have killed me that day. In the ring. In front of everyone. You could have ended it." "Yes, sir." "Why did you not?" Daniel's eyes never left Silas's face. "Because killing you would have killed all of us." The words hung in the air between them. Simple, honest, devastating. Silas backed toward the door. His mind raced. Daniel was a threat. But Daniel was also controlled. disciplined, strategic. Someone who thought beyond the immediate moment, who calculated consequences before acting. That made him more dangerous and more valuable. "I need to think," Silas muttered. He stepped outside and locked the door again. Night fell. Silas paced his study while his wife slept upstairs. The manifest lay on his desk, illuminated by lamplight. He had two choices. Get rid of Daniel immediately, sell him, send him away, remove the threat. Or use him. Learn from him. Turn that dangerous knowledge into something Silas could control and claim as his own. Pride made the decision. Silas walked to the overseer's quarters and knocked hard on the door. Brackett answered, half-dressed and annoyed. "Prepare the fighting ring," Silas ordered. "Tomorrow afternoon. I want everyone assembled." "Sir?" Brackett looked confused. "I thought the fights were suspended." "Not anymore." Silas's jaw tightened. "And this time, we are doing things differently. Bring weapons. Real ones. I want this to mean something." Brackett nodded slowly. "Who's fighting?" "Daniel," Silas said. "Against me. And this time, everyone will see who the real master is." Morning light barely touched the walls of the punishment shed when the door swung open with a heavy creak. Daniel opened his eyes, already awake. He had not slept much. The wooden floor beneath him felt damp from yesterday's rain, and his muscles ached from sitting in the same position for hours. Overseer Brackett stepped inside, his face blank and mechanical as always. He held a pair of iron chains in one hand, lighter than the usual restraints. "Up," he said flatly. Daniel stood slowly, keeping his movements calm and controlled. Brackett approached and fastened the chains around Daniel's wrists, leaving enough slack that he could move his hands apart, but not completely free. "These are for show," Brackett muttered, his voice low enough that only Daniel could hear. "Master wants everyone to see you bound when you walk out there." Daniel nodded slightly. He understood. Theater, control, power displayed for the audience. Brackett led him outside into the bright sunlight. Daniel squinted against the glare. The air smelled like dirt and sweat and fear. He could hear voices ahead, dozens of them gathered somewhere beyond the barn. They rounded the corner, and Daniel saw the ring. It was larger than before. Someone had cleared a wide circle of ground, marked with stones at the edges. The entire enslaved population of the Hawthorne plantation stood in rows around the perimeter, forced to watch. Men, women, children, all of them silent, all of them staring. In the center of the ring stood Silas. He wore clean clothes, white shirt rolled to the elbows, dark trousers, polished boots. His hair was combed back neatly. His face glowed with manic excitement. He paced back and forth inside the circle, a metal baton swinging casually in his right hand. When he saw Daniel approach, his grin widened. "There he is!" Silas shouted, raising the baton high. "Our special guest." A few nervous glances passed through the crowd. No one spoke. Brackett unlocked the chains from Daniel's wrists and stepped back outside the ring. Daniel stood still, waiting. Silas walked over to a wooden crate at the edge of the circle and pulled out a long staff. Smooth, worn wood. Solid, but not heavy. He tossed it to Daniel. Daniel caught it reflexively. "Fair fight," Silas announced loudly, turning to address the crowd. "Same weapons, same rules. Best man wins." He spun the baton in his hand, the metal catching the sunlight. "Let's see if yesterday's luck holds up." Daniel looked down at the staff in his hands. It was lighter than Silas's baton, easier to maneuver, but also weaker. A direct strike from the metal weapon would shatter the wood. That was the point. Silas wanted everyone to see Daniel armed, wanted everyone to believe this was a real contest. But the weapons were not equal. The outcome was already decided. "Ready?" Silas called out, his voice high and eager. Daniel did not answer. He shifted his weight slightly, settling into a balanced stance, feet shoulder-width apart, knees loose, staff held diagonally across his body. Silas charged. The baton came down fast and hard, aimed directly at Daniel's shoulder. Daniel moved left, just enough. The metal weapon sliced through empty air and struck the ground with a dull thud. Silas spun immediately, swinging sideways. Daniel stepped back, letting the baton pass inches from his chest. Another swing. Another dodge. Silas's breathing grew heavier. His face flushed red. He swung again. Overhand, sidearm, upward thrust. Each time, Daniel moved just enough to avoid contact. He did not block, did not counter, simply moved. The crowd watched in absolute silence. Silas stopped, panting. Sweat dripped from his forehead. "Fight back!" he shouted. Daniel remained still, staff lowered slightly. "I said fight back!" Silas lunged forward, bringing the baton down with both hands. This time, Daniel raised the staff and angled it diagonally. The baton struck the wood and slid off to the side, redirected harmlessly into the dirt. Silas stumbled forward from his own momentum. Daniel could have struck then, could have brought the staff down on Silas's exposed back, but he did not. Instead, he stepped aside and let Silas recover. Silas turned, breathing hard, his eyes wild. He swung again, desperate now, less controlled. Daniel deflected once, twice, guiding the baton away with minimal effort. Each deflection used Silas's own force against him, making the weapon feel heavier in his hands. "Stop toying with me!" Silas screamed. Daniel met his eyes but said nothing. Silas charged again, baton raised high. Daniel sidestepped, hooked the staff behind Silas's ankle, and gave a small tug. Silas's leg buckled. He fell forward, catching himself on his hands and knees. The crowd gasped softly. Silas scrambled upright, his face twisted with rage and humiliation. He swung wildly. No technique, no strategy, just fury. Daniel blocked, deflected, stepped back. He let Silas tire himself out, let him waste energy on attacks that went nowhere. Finally, after several minutes of frantic swinging, Silas connected. The baton struck Daniel's shoulder. Not hard, but enough to make contact. Daniel staggered backward deliberately. He let his knees buckle. He dropped the staff and fell to one knee, lowering his head as if stunned. Silas stood over him, chest heaving, baton raised, victory painted across his flushed face. "There!" Silas shouted, turning to the crowd. "You see? I am still the master here." He raised the baton high above his head. "This is my land, my rules, my power." The enslaved people stared at the ground. No one applauded. No one moved. Silas grabbed Daniel by the arm and hauled him upright. "Tell them," he hissed. "Tell them I won." Daniel looked at him calmly. "You won, sir." Silas released him and stepped back, breathing hard. His hands trembled slightly. Sweat soaked through his shirt. He had won, but he looked like he had barely survived. Brackett moved forward and refastened the chains around Daniel's wrists. Daniel did not resist. As Brackett led him away, Daniel glanced back at the crowd. A few eyes met his, brief, knowing. They had seen what really happened. They understood. Daniel had not fought, had not escalated, had shown Silas's growing desperation, his lack of control, his need to prove something that no longer felt true. The real strategy was protection. Keep Silas feeling superior. Keep him from lashing out at the others. Make him believe he still had power. But the cracks were showing. That evening, Silas appeared outside the shed again. He looked exhausted. His knuckles were bruised from gripping the baton too hard. "Tomorrow morning," he said through the locked door. "We practice. Just you and me. No audience." Daniel said nothing. The next morning came. Brackett unlocked the shed and led Daniel to a small clearing behind the barn. Silas waited there, already sweating despite the early hour. He carried 2 staffs this time, both wooden, both equal. "Show me," Silas demanded. "Show me how you do it." Daniel took the staff. For the next hour, he demonstrated basic footwork, weight shifts, angling, distance control. Silas tried to follow, but grew frustrated when his body would not move the same way. "Why can't I do it?" Silas snapped. "It takes time," Daniel said quietly. "I don't have time." That afternoon, Silas called for another session. This time he was rougher, more aggressive. He swung harder, demanded faster responses, grew angry when Daniel stayed calm. By evening, Silas was limping. His shoulder ached. His pride felt bruised. The second day repeated the pattern. Morning practice, afternoon practice. Silas growing more desperate each time. He drank between sessions now, small sips from a flask hidden in his coat. Daniel noticed everything, but said nothing. On the third evening, as the sun began to set, Silas appeared at the shed door one final time. His eyes were bloodshot. His hands shook. "Tonight," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "in the barn. No witnesses, just you and me." He turned and walked away before Daniel could respond. The barn smelled of hay and old wood and something faintly sweet, rotting grain perhaps, or mildew creeping through the walls. Daniel stepped inside and waited while his eyes adjusted to the dim light. A single lantern hung from a nail near the back wall, casting long shadows across the floor. Silas closed the door behind them. The sound echoed in the empty space. "Turn around," Silas said. Daniel turned. Silas reached forward and unlocked the chains from Daniel's wrists. The metal fell away with a soft clink. Daniel rubbed his wrists slowly, feeling the blood flow return. Silas tossed the chains aside. They landed in the straw, with a muffled thud. "No one knows we're here," Silas said. His voice was rough, strained. "Brackett thinks you're locked in for the night. My wife thinks I'm checking the horses." Daniel said nothing. Silas walked over to the lantern and adjusted it slightly, making the light brighter. His hands trembled. "I want the truth," he said, turning back to face Daniel. "I want to know what you really are." Daniel looked at him calmly. "I'm a carpenter, sir." "Don't lie to me." Silas's voice rose. "I saw the papers. I know where you came from. I know you were trained." He stepped closer. "Show me." No holding back. No pretending. Daniel remained still. "That's not a good idea." "I don't care," Silas shouted. The sound bounced off the barn walls. "I need to see it. I need to understand." Daniel studied him carefully. Silas's eyes were wild, desperate. His shirt was untucked, his hair disheveled. He looked like a man falling apart from the inside. "If I do this," Daniel said quietly, "you won't like what happens." "Just do it." Daniel exhaled slowly. He adjusted his stance slightly, feet balanced, weight centered, arms loose at his sides. He did not raise his hands, did not prepare a fighting position. He simply stood there, waiting. Silas lunged. It was fast, faster than before. He aimed a punch directly at Daniel's face, putting all his weight behind it. Daniel shifted his head 3 inches to the left. The fist passed by his ear. Before Silas could recover, Daniel stepped inside his guard, placed one hand on Silas's wrist, and guided the momentum forward. Silas stumbled past him, off balance. Silas spun around and swung again. Daniel ducked under the blow, moved behind him, and swept Silas's leg out from beneath him with a single precise motion. Silas hit the ground hard. Air rushed from his lungs. He scrambled upright, breathing heavily. "Again!" he gasped. This time Silas tried to grapple. He reached for Daniel's shoulders, attempting to use his size and strength to overpower him. Daniel let him get close, then twisted, redirecting Silas's grip and using it to spin him sideways. Silas fell again, landing on his back. He lay there for a moment, staring up at the rafters. Then he pushed himself up onto his elbows. "How?" he whispered. Daniel did not answer. Silas stood slowly, his chest heaving. Sweat dripped from his forehead. He wiped it away with the back of his hand. "One more time," he said. All out. No stopping. Daniel shook his head slightly. You should stop now. No! Silas roared. He charged forward with everything he had, arms wide, trying to tackle Daniel to the ground. Daniel moved like water. He sidestepped, hooked his leg behind Silas's knee, and pushed gently at the shoulder. Silas's own momentum carried him forward. He crashed into the barn wall, shoulder first, and collapsed onto the straw-covered floor. Before Silas could rise, Daniel was on him. He pinned Silas's wrist with one hand, placed his knee across Silas's chest, and held him down with minimal effort. Silas struggled, twisting, thrashing, but Daniel's positioning was perfect. Every movement Silas made only locked the hold tighter. Silas's breathing turned ragged, panicked. Daniel leaned down slightly, his voice calm and low. You break what you fear, he said. You fear what you made. Silas's eyes went wide. Let me go. You wanted the truth, Daniel continued. This is it. You chose wrong. You picked the one man who could do this. He applied a fraction more pressure. I didn't ask for this. You brought it on yourself. Silas's face twisted. Fear, rage, humiliation, all mixed together. You're just a slave. And you're just a man, Daniel said quietly. Same as anyone else. Same bones. Same blood. He paused. You created this. You made me dangerous by putting me in that ring. You made yourself weak by needing to prove you weren't. Silas stopped struggling. His chest rose and fell rapidly beneath Daniel's knee. What do you want? He whispered. I want you to stop, Daniel said. Stop the fights. Stop using us for your games. Stop pretending you're something you're not. I can't. You can. Daniel's voice was firm. You're the master. You make the rules. Change them. Silas stared up at him, breathing hard. Finally, he nodded. Okay, he said hoarsely. Okay, I'll stop. Say it again. I'll stop the fights. Silas's voice cracked. I'll give better treatment. More food. Lighter work. Whatever you want. Daniel studied his face for a long moment. Then he released the hold and stood up slowly. Silas rolled onto his side, coughing, gasping for air. Daniel stepped back and waited. Silas pushed himself up onto his hands and knees. He looked up at Daniel, and something passed between them. An unspoken acknowledgement. Silas had been stripped of his illusions. For the first time in his life, he had felt completely powerless. You could have killed me, Silas said quietly. I didn't want to kill you, Daniel replied. I wanted you to understand. Silas lowered his head. He stayed there on his knees for several seconds, breathing hard. Then, slowly, he stood. His legs shook. His hands trembled. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. Go, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Get out of here. Go back to the shed. Daniel walked toward the barn door. His movements were calm, unhurried. He reached for the handle, pulled it open, and stepped outside into the cool evening air. The door swung shut behind him. He took 2 steps forward, and then stopped. A figure stood in the shadows near the corner of the barn. A woman, tall, slender, dressed in a dark evening gown. Her face was illuminated faintly by the light from a nearby window. Mrs. Eleanor Hawthorne. Her eyes met Daniel's, cold, calculating, furious. She had been standing there the entire time. She had heard everything. The morning air was cool and damp. Daniel stood near the carpentry shed, running his hand along a section of fence that needed replacing. The wood was old and split in several places. He pulled out a measuring stick from his belt and marked where the new boards would need to go. Brackett stood 20 feet away, watching. He didn't say anything, just watched. Daniel worked slowly and carefully. He had learned long ago that rushing raised suspicion. Calm, steady work kept him invisible. Behind him, he heard footsteps. Quick, precise steps on the gravel path leading from the main house. He didn't turn around. He kept his eyes on the fence. The footsteps stopped. "Mr. Brackett," a woman's voice said. Cool. Controlled. "Leave us." Daniel's stomach tightened. He recognized the voice. Brackett hesitated. "Ma'am, I'm supposed to keep watch." "I said leave us." Eleanor Hawthorne's tone did not rise. It didn't need to. Brackett muttered something under his breath and walked away, his boots crunching against the gravel. Daniel heard him stop somewhere near the barn. Close enough to see, far enough not to hear. Daniel set down the measuring stick. He turned slowly. Eleanor stood 3 feet away, her arms crossed. She wore a dark green dress with black trim. Her hair was pulled back tightly. Her expression was cold and sharp, like a blade left out in winter. "You will not speak to me," she said quietly. "You will listen." Daniel kept his face blank. He nodded once. Eleanor stepped closer. "I know what happened last night," she said. "I heard every word. I saw my husband on his knees in front of you." Her voice remained calm, but her eyes burned. "Do you understand what that means?" Daniel said nothing. "It means you have destroyed him," Eleanor continued. "Not with violence, not with rebellion, with something far worse." She paused. "You made him feel weak. You made him question himself. You planted doubt in his mind." She turned slightly, glancing toward the main house. "Silas is a fool," she said. "He always has been. But he is my fool, and this plantation depends on his ability to maintain control. Not real control, the appearance of it, the reputation." Daniel remained still. Eleanor turned back to face him. "If word spreads that my husband was bested by a slave, if the neighbors learn that he locked himself in a barn with you and came out broken, we will lose everything. Our standing, our credibility, our future." She took another step forward. "I will not allow that." Daniel felt a chill run through him. This was different from Silas's rage. This was something colder, more dangerous. "You will be sold," Eleanor said simply. "Today?" Quietly. "To a trader heading west. You will be gone before anyone notices. And when people ask, I will say you ran, that you were ungrateful, that you proved yourself untrustworthy." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, I told you not to speak." Her voice cut through the air like a whip crack. Daniel closed his mouth. Eleanor studied him for a moment. "You are clever," she said. "I will give you that. But cleverness without power is just noise." She adjusted her shawl. "The wagon arrives at dawn tomorrow. If you attempt to run, I will have the others punished in your place. If you resist, I will ensure the trader knows you are violent and unmanageable, and he will treat you accordingly." She stepped back. "You have already caused enough damage. Do not make it worse." Eleanor turned and walked away, her footsteps fading into the distance. Daniel stood there, staring at the ground, his hands curled into fists at his sides. Brackett returned a few minutes later, standing in the same spot as before. He didn't ask questions. He just watched. The rest of the day passed like a slow dream. Daniel moved through his tasks mechanically. He repaired the fence. He helped Isaac carry lumber to the main barn. He checked the joints on a wagon wheel that had been wobbling for weeks. No one told him what was coming, but they knew. The enslaved people always knew. Isaac didn't speak to him, but he stayed close. Tobias worked beside him in silence, his hands moving quickly, his face tight. An older woman named Ruth brought him water twice, more than usual. She didn't say anything, but her eyes said enough. "They're going to take you." The overseers were tense. They barked orders more harshly than normal. They moved in pairs instead of alone. Something had shifted. By mid-afternoon, Daniel saw Eleanor speaking quietly with Brackett near the side of the house. She handed him a folded piece of paper. Brackett nodded, tucked it into his coat, and walked toward the road. Daniel kept working. That evening, he returned to his cabin. The sun was setting, turning the sky orange and red. He sat on the edge of his small cot and stared at the wall. The door opened suddenly. Brackett stepped inside, followed by two other overseers. They carried heavy chains. "Stand up," Brackett said. Daniel stood slowly. "Arms out." Daniel extended his arms. The overseers locked iron cuffs around his wrists. Then his ankles. The chains were tight, tighter than before. They cut into his skin. "What's happening?" Daniel asked quietly. Brackett didn't answer. He turned and walked out. The other overseers grabbed Daniel's arms and pulled him forward. Outside, the enslaved community had gathered. Not by choice. They had been ordered to watch. Isaac stood near the front, his face twisted with helpless anger. Ruth covered her mouth with one hand. Tobias looked away, unable to meet Daniel's eyes. Daniel was marched across the yard toward a large covered wagon parked near the road. A man sat on the driver's bench, a trader, rough-looking, with a scarred face and dirt-stained clothes. He chewed tobacco and spat onto the ground. "That him?" the trader asked. "That's him," Brackett said. The trader grunted. "Load him up." The overseers shoved Daniel toward the back of the wagon. Inside, the space was small and dark. Wooden slats lined the sides. The floor was covered with straw that smelled of sweat and fear. Daniel climbed inside. The overseers locked his chains to an iron ring bolted to the wagon floor. Then they closed the back gate and secured it with a heavy padlock. Through the gaps in the slats, Daniel could see the faces of his people, silent, shaking, watching their fragile hope collapse into dust. The trader climbed onto the bench and grabbed the reins. "We leave at first light," he called back to Brackett. Brackett nodded. "Good." The yard emptied slowly. The enslaved people were ordered back to their cabins. One by one, they disappeared into the darkness. Daniel sat in the wagon, his wrists aching, his breathing shallow. The night stretched on, slow and suffocating. The sky began to change. Black turned to deep blue, then gray. The faintest hint of light appeared on the horizon. Daniel heard the trader moving outside, boots on gravel, the creak of the wagon bench as the man climbed up, the jingle of harnesses as he adjusted the reins. The horses snorted and shifted, their breath visible in the cool morning air. Daniel pressed his face against the wooden slats, looking out at the plantation one last time. The cabins were dark. The fields were empty. Everything was still. The trader clicked his tongue. The horses stepped forward. The wagon lurched into motion. The wagon rolled forward. The wheels creaked. The horses snorted. The trader shifted in his seat, adjusting the reins. Then, a shout. "Stop!" The trader pulled back on the reins. The horses slowed, then halted. The wagon rocked slightly as it came to rest. Daniel pressed his face harder against the wooden slats, trying to see. Someone was running across the yard. Fast, unsteady. The trader turned in his seat. "What the hell?" Silas Hawthorne stumbled into view, still wearing his nightcoat. His hair was wild. His face was pale and slick with sweat. He moved like a man who had just woken from a nightmare and wasn't sure if it had ended. "Get down," Silas said, breathing hard. "Get off the wagon." The trader stared at him. "Excuse me?" "I said get down." Silas's voice cracked. The trader spat tobacco juice onto the ground. "I got my money already, mister. Deal's done. I'm changing the deal." Silas reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled wad of bills. He thrust them toward the trader. "Here, take it. Just get off my property." The trader looked at the money, then at Silas, then back at the money. He didn't move. "Silas!" Eleanor's voice cut through the air like a knife. She stood on the front porch of the main house, her hair still pinned perfectly despite the early hour. She wore a dark robe over her nightgown, her arms crossed tightly. "Get back inside," she said coldly. Silas didn't turn around. "No." Eleanor stepped off the porch and walked toward him. Her footsteps were slow and deliberate. "You will embarrass us in front of this man, in front of the help, and you will regret it." "I already regret it," Silas said. His voice was quieter now, shaking. "I regret all of it." Eleanor stopped a few feet away. Her eyes narrowed. "You are not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking clearly for the first time in months." Silas turned to face her. "I can't do this." "You will do this." Eleanor's voice remained calm, but her jaw tightened. "That man is dangerous. He humiliated you. He has poisoned your mind. And if you do not send him away, everyone will know what happened in that barn." Silas flinched. "They already know." "They suspect," Eleanor hissed. "There is a difference. Suspicion fades. Proof destroys." She gestured toward the wagon. "If you stop this now, if you drag him back into our lives, you confirm everything. You prove that you are weak, that you cannot control your own household, that you fear a slave more than you value your own dignity." Silas looked at the ground. His hands were trembling. Eleanor stepped closer. "I have protected you," she said quietly. "I have covered your mistakes. I have lied to our neighbors. I have maintained our reputation while you played your violent games." Her voice hardened. "But I will not protect you from this. If you bring him back, you are on your own." Silas stood there for a long moment, breathing hard. Then he looked up at the wagon. "Open it," he said. The trader frowned. "What?" "Open the back of the wagon. Now." The trader climbed down slowly, muttering under his breath. He walked to the rear of the wagon and unlocked the heavy padlock. The gate swung open with a loud creak. Inside, Daniel sat chained to the floor, his wrists raw from the iron cuffs. He blinked against the sudden light. Silas walked over and reached into the wagon. His hands shook as he fumbled with the lock on Daniel's chains. It took him 3 tries to get the key in. Finally, the lock clicked open. "Get out," Silas said. Daniel stared at him. "What?" "I said get out." Silas pulled the chains free from the iron ring. Daniel climbed out slowly, his legs stiff from sitting in the cramped space. He landed hard on the gravel, nearly stumbling. Silas grabbed his arm to steady him. Eleanor's face went white. "Silas, stop this." "No." Silas turned to face her, still holding Daniel's arm. "I won't. You will lose everything." "I've already lost everything?" Silas's voice broke. "I lost it the moment I started this. The moment I made him fight. The moment I—" He stopped, breathing hard. "I can't live like this anymore." Eleanor's expression shifted. The cold control cracked just slightly, revealing something harder underneath. "If you do this," she said quietly, "I will tell everyone. I will make sure every neighbor, every merchant, every man we do business with knows that you were bested by a slave, that you begged him for lessons like a child, that you crawled on your knees in front of him." Silas's face went pale, but he didn't let go of Daniel's arm. "Do what you want," he said. "I don't care anymore." Eleanor stared at him. For the first time, she seemed genuinely shocked. Silas turned to Daniel. "Run," he said urgently. "Go. Get as far from here as you can. I'll tell them you overpowered me. I'll say you attacked the trader and stole a horse. Just go." Daniel pulled his arm free. He looked at Silas, then at the wagon, then at the cabins behind them. The enslaved people had gathered again. They stood in the shadows, watching in stunned silence. Isaac, Ruth, Tobias, all of them. "No," Daniel said. Silas blinked. "What?" "I'm not running." Daniel's voice was steady. "Not alone." Silas stared at him. You have to. This is your chance." "My chance?" Daniel gestured toward the others. "What about them? You think I can just leave? You think freedom means anything if I walk away and leave everyone else behind?" Silas's face twisted. I can't help all of them. That's impossible. That would destroy you," Daniel finished. "I know." Silas shook his head frantically. "You don't understand. If I help everyone escape, they'll hunt me down. They'll hang me. I'll lose the plantation. My name, my life." "You've already lost your life," Daniel said quietly. You lost it when you started treating people like animals, when you made us fight for your amusement, when you decided your pride mattered more than our pain." Silas's hands dropped to his sides. He looked broken, hollow. Daniel took a slow breath. "I'll stay," he said, "but only if you help us. All of us." "Not just me." Eleanor laughed bitterly from behind them. "He won't do it. He's too much of a coward." Silas closed his eyes. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Silas opened his eyes and looked at Daniel. "Tonight," he said hoarsely, "behind the barn. After dark. We'll figure something out." Daniel studied him carefully. Then he nodded once. Silas turned to the trader. "Leave. Now." The trader grabbed his money, climbed back onto the wagon, and snapped the reins. The horses lurched forward, and the wagon rolled away down the road. Eleanor stood frozen on the pathway, her face pale with fury. Silas didn't look at her. He turned and walked back toward the house, moving like a man in a trance. Daniel stood in the yard, the iron cuffs still dangling from his wrists. Brackett appeared from somewhere near the barn and grabbed his arm roughly. "Back to your cabin," Brackett muttered, "and don't even think about running." Daniel let himself be led away. The other enslaved people watched him pass, their faces filled with confusion, fear, and the faintest flicker of something that might have been hope. He returned to his small cabin and sat on the edge of his cot. The sun climbed slowly into the sky. He waited for nightfall. The sun died slowly that day. Daniel watched it sink through the gaps in his cabin's walls, tracking the light as it bled from gold to red to purple. Each minute felt stretched thin, like old rope about to snap. He sat on his cot and waited. The other cabins around him grew quiet as the enslaved people finished their evening routines. Fires were banked. Children were hushed. The overseer made his rounds, his boots crunching on gravel as he checked doors and counted heads. Daniel listened to every sound. He counted Brackett's footsteps, counted the pauses, counted the moments between each door closing. When the footsteps finally faded toward the main house, Daniel rose. He moved to the door and pressed his ear against the rough wood. Outside, the night insects had started their chorus. Crickets, cicadas, the distant call of an owl. He waited another 10 minutes. Then he eased the door open. The night air was thick and warm. No moon, just stars scattered across the black sky like broken glass. Daniel stepped out and closed the door silently behind him. He moved through the shadows between cabins, keeping low. His feet found the soft dirt patches automatically, avoiding gravel and dried leaves. Old training, muscle memory from a life before chains. The barn loomed ahead, darker than the darkness around it. Daniel circled around to the back, where the fence met the tree line. Silas was already there. He stood with his back against the barn wall, holding a small lantern that barely gave off any light. The flame inside was turned down low, just enough to see shapes. Silas's face looked hollow in the dim glow. His eyes were red-rimmed. "You came," Silas said quietly. Daniel stopped a few feet away. "You told me to." Silas laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I didn't think you would. I thought—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "I don't know what I thought." Daniel said nothing. He waited. Silas set the lantern down on the ground between them. "I've been thinking all day," he said, "about what you said, about what Eleanor said, about everything." He rubbed his face with both hands. "I can't do this halfway. If I help you run, they'll know I let you go. They'll come after me anyway. Eleanor will make sure of it." "I know," Daniel said. "So, if I'm going to lose everything—" Silas looked up. "It might as well mean something." Daniel studied him carefully. "You're willing to help everyone?" "I don't know if I'm willing," Silas said hoarsely. "But I don't see another choice. Not anymore." He picked up the lantern again, holding it close to his chest like a shield. "What do you need me to do?" Daniel took a slow breath. The overseers, Brackett and the others. They patrol at night. They watch the roads and the main paths. If we try to leave with everyone, they'll see us before we get 100 yards. So, what do? You create a distraction, Daniel said. Something big enough to pull them away. Something that makes them think there's an emergency somewhere else. Silas frowned. What kind of emergency? Fire, Daniel said simply. Or the threat of one. Maybe a broken fence in the south field. Something that makes Brackett think the livestock are getting loose. He'll take every available man to fix it before it becomes a real problem. Silas's eyes widened slightly. You want me to sabotage my own property? I want you to choose, Daniel said. You can protect your property, or you can protect your soul. You can't do both. Silas stared at him for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. The south field. I can break a part of the fence. Scatter some hay near the lanterns. Make it look like someone was careless. Brackett will panic. He'll bring everyone. How long can you keep them there? An hour. Maybe more if I make it convincing enough. Silas swallowed hard. But you need to move fast. Once they realize it's a false alarm, they'll come back. And when they find the cabin's empty, we'll be gone by then, Daniel said. Where will you go? North, through the forest. We'll avoid the roads completely. Daniel gestured toward the tree line. There are old hunting paths back there, barely used. The ground is soft enough that we won't leave clear tracks if we're careful. Silas looked toward the trees. That forest goes on for miles. You'll get lost. No, Daniel said. I won't. Something in his voice made Silas pause. He looked back at Daniel. You've done this before, haven't you? Not here, but somewhere. Daniel didn't answer. Silas closed his eyes briefly. I really did pick the wrong person to fight. Yes, Daniel said. You did. Silas straightened up. When do we start? Tonight, just before midnight. You go to the south field and raise the alarm. I'll gather everyone and lead them north. Daniel stepped closer. But you need to understand something. Once we leave, you can't change your mind. You can't call for help. You can't try to stop us. I won't, Silas said. You'll lose everything, Daniel pressed. Your wife, your reputation, your plantation, maybe your life. I know. Then why are you doing this? Silas met his eyes. For the first time since Daniel had known him, Silas looked completely stripped of pretense. No arrogance, no pride, just exhaustion. Because I'm already dead, Silas said quietly. I've been dead since the day I put you in that ring. Maybe longer. At least this way. My death might mean something. Daniel held his gaze for a moment. Then he nodded once. Midnight, he said. Don't be late. Silas picked up the lantern. I won't. Daniel turned and slipped back into the shadows. He moved quickly now, circling through the darkness toward the cabins. His heart was beating faster, but his hands were steady. He reached Isaac's cabin first. He tapped lightly on the door. 3 quick knocks, a pause, then 2 more. Their old signal. The door opened a crack. Isaac's face appeared, eyes wide with fear and confusion. Get ready, Daniel whispered. We're leaving tonight. Isaac's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Gather your things, only what you can carry silently. Wake Ruth and the children. Tell them to stay calm and stay quiet. Daniel gripped Isaac's shoulder. Pass the word to the others. Cabin by cabin. No loud voices, no panic. We move together. Isaac nodded slowly. Where are we going? North, into the forest. I'll explain the rest when we're moving. Daniel glanced over his shoulder. We don't have much time. How are we getting past the overseers? They'll be distracted. Trust me. Isaac stared at him for a moment longer. Then he nodded again. Firmer this time. I'll spread the word. Daniel moved to the next cabin. Then the next. One by one, he woke the community. Mothers gathered children and wrapped them in quiet blankets. Men found tools that could double as weapons if needed. Old folks prepared themselves for a hard walk. Fear moved through the cabins like wind through tall grass. But so did something else. Something Daniel hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. He returned to his own cabin and gathered his few possessions. A small knife he'd hidden under the floorboards. A strip of cloth. Nothing else mattered. He stepped outside and looked up at the stars. The sky was perfectly clear. No clouds. Good. They would need the starlight to navigate. All around him, the enslaved community emerged from their cabins. They moved like ghosts, silent and careful. Children clung to their mothers. Men carried bags and tools. Everyone looked at Daniel, waiting. He raised one hand. Wait. In the distance, toward the main house, a light appeared. Silas, carrying his lantern. Daniel watched as the light moved across the grounds, heading south toward the fields. He heard Silas's voice rise in the distance, shouting for Brackett. "Fire danger! South fence is broken! Get down here now!" More lights appeared. The overseers, scrambling. Brackett's voice barked orders, footsteps running, lanterns swinging, all of them moving south. Daniel lowered his hand and pointed north. The community began to move. They moved like water through the darkness. Daniel led them north, one hand raised to signal stops and starts. Behind him, 43 souls followed in near-perfect silence. Mothers carried infants against their chests. One hand pressed gently over tiny mouths. Fathers guided children by the shoulders. The elderly leaned on younger arms but kept pace. Daniel had taught them well during those stolen moments between work shifts, how to place their feet, how to breathe, how to move through space without disturbing it. The tree line swallowed them within minutes. The forest was thick here, untouched by the plantation's cultivation. Branches reached overhead like skeletal fingers. Underbrush grabbed at clothing and skin. But Daniel knew this kind of terrain. He'd grown up in it, in another life, in a place where the ocean met the land and boys learned to move through mangrove roots without making a sound. He raised his fist. Everyone stopped. In the distance, back toward the plantation, lanterns still clustered around the south field. Silas's voice carried faintly on the wind, still shouting about broken fences and loose livestock. Brackett's angry responses echoed back. Daniel lowered his hand and moved forward again. The ground sloped downward, growing softer. He could hear the creek before he could see it. A gentle rushing sound that would have been peaceful under different circumstances. Now, it represented their first real obstacle. The community gathered at the bank. The creek was about 15 feet wide, shallow, but moving fast enough to make noise. Crossing it would require perfect coordination. Daniel turned to Isaac, who had positioned himself near the middle of the group. He pointed to the widest section of the creek, where flat stones jutted above the waterline like stepping platforms. Isaac nodded and began guiding people toward it. Daniel waded into the water first. The cold hit him immediately, soaking through his thin trousers. He moved carefully, testing each stone before putting his full weight down. The current tugged at his ankles, but the stones held firm. He reached the far bank and turned back. One by one, they crossed. Mothers handed babies to fathers, who stood midstream, forming a human chain. Children stepped from stone to stone with small, careful feet. The elderly moved slowly, supported on both sides by younger men and women. Ruth, Isaac's wife, slipped halfway across. Her foot missed a stone and plunged into the water. She gasped, catching herself on Isaac's arm. For one terrible moment, everyone froze, but no one screamed. No one panicked. Ruth steadied herself, found her footing, and kept moving. Daniel counted them as they reached his side. 20, 30, 40, 43. Everyone made it. They pushed deeper into the forest, leaving the creek behind. Daniel kept them away from the main patrol road, which cut through the woods about a quarter-mile to the east. Instead, he followed animal trails, narrow paths worn smooth by deer and wild pigs. The ground here was unpredictable, full of roots and hidden dips, But it also meant their tracks would blend with countless others. Behind them, new sounds emerged, shouting. Not Silas anymore. A woman's voice, high and furious. Eleanor. She must have discovered the empty cabins. Daniel imagined her rage, her panic, her desperate orders to search the grounds. He could picture Brackett and the other overseers abandoning Silas's false emergency and rushing back toward the main house. But they were looking in the wrong direction. They would check the main road first, then the river to the south, then the neighboring plantation. By the time they thought to search the northern forest, the trail would be hours old and impossible to follow in darkness. Daniel kept moving. An hour passed. Then 2. The children began to tire. Daniel could hear their breathing growing heavier, their footsteps dragging. He signaled another stop and let everyone rest for a few precious minutes. People collapsed against tree trunks, gulping air. Some drank from canteens they'd managed to bring. Others simply closed their eyes. Daniel didn't sit. He stood at the front of the group, listening to the forest, watching for movement. Isaac appeared beside him. "How much further?" "We need to reach the state border before sunrise," Daniel said quietly. "Another 3 hours, maybe 4. Can everyone make it?" Daniel looked back at the exhausted faces. An old woman named Esther sat with her head bowed, chest heaving. A young boy, no more than 6, had fallen asleep against his mother's shoulder. "They'll make it," Daniel said. "They have to." Isaac nodded slowly. "What about Silas?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. He thought about the broken man standing alone in the south field, listening to Eleanor's distant screaming. Silas could stop them even now. He could call out, point the overseers in the right direction, save what little remained of his reputation. But Daniel knew he wouldn't. "Silas is gone," Daniel said finally. "One way or another, he's already gone." They moved again. The forest began to thin as they climbed higher ground. The trees grew further apart. Moonlight broke through the canopy more frequently, painting silver patches across the forest floor. Daniel used it to navigate, following the North Star whenever he could glimpse it through the branches. The children had to be carried now. Fathers hoisted sons onto their backs. Mothers cradled daughters in aching arms. The elderly leaned heavily on makeshift walking sticks, but their eyes remained fixed forward. No one asked to turn back. No one suggested giving up. They had tasted freedom, even if only the idea of it, and that taste was stronger than exhaustion. Dawn arrived slowly. The sky shifted from black to deep blue to pale gray. Birds began their morning songs. The forest came alive around them with small, rustling sounds, squirrels, rabbits, things returning to daylight routines. Daniel spotted the marker he'd been searching for, a lightning-struck oak tree, split down the middle but still standing. Beyond it, the land flattened into open country. No fences, no patrol roads, no plantation boundaries, the state border. They stumbled into a small clearing just past the tree line. The community collapsed together, too exhausted to celebrate. Some cried quietly. Others simply stared at the sky, unable to believe they'd made it. Daniel stood at the edge of the group, looking back the way they'd come. Somewhere beyond those trees, Silas Hawthorne was facing the consequences of his choice. Eleanor would destroy him socially, financially, perhaps literally. The plantation would collapse under scandal. Everything Silas had built his identity around would crumble. And it was Daniel who had broken him. Not with fists, not with weapons, but with patience, precision, and the quiet dismantling of a man's delusions about power. A settlement appeared on the horizon as the sun climbed higher. Simple buildings, smoke rising from chimneys, people moving about their morning routines. A freedmen's community established by those who had escaped before. When they saw Daniel's group approaching, they came running. 1 week passed. Daniel stood at the eastern edge of the settlement, watching dawn break over unfamiliar land. The sky turned from purple to pink to gold. Birds he didn't recognize sang songs he'd never heard. Everything felt strange and new. Behind him, the settlement was waking up. He could hear voices, footsteps, the sounds of normal life. Isaac and Ruth had claimed a small cabin. The children were learning to play without fear. Esther sat outside each morning, simply breathing free air. They had been welcomed, fed, given shelter and work. The settlement's elders had listened to their story with knowing expressions. They had their own scars, their own escapes, their own monsters left behind. Daniel touched the rough bark of a nearby tree, feeling its solidity beneath his palm. He had not escaped because Silas freed him. Silas freed him because Daniel broke him first. That truth sat heavy in his chest. There was no pride in it, no satisfaction, just the cold, complex weight of survival through destruction. He had become exactly what he needed to become to save his people, a weapon forged from the system meant to crush him. The sun climbed higher, warming his face. Daniel turned away from the past and walked back toward the settlement, toward the future he'd fought for, toward the life he'd earned through patience and pain and the careful dismantling of monsters. The morning light followed him home. I hope you found that story powerful. Leave a like on the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. I have handpicked 2 stories for you that are even more powerful. Have a great day.